Gentlemen, and these are my disclosures. In 2017, uh, these three scientists were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine for their discoveries on molecular mechanisms controlling the circadian rhythm. And they brought to the fore the new dimension of science, the study of human sleep. The Nobel Prize was just rubber stamping the exponential speed of development of the science of circadian rhythm and of sleep medicine. Why do we need sleep? Well, the basic facts are that sleep is a universal phenomenon. Everybody and every living creature sleeps, and if we don't sleep, we die. The basic functions attributable to sleep, and these are not exhaustive, um, refer to restorative functions uh, with the establishment of attention, reaction time, and performance, and the consolidation of memory, which helps learning and remembering, um, the modification of the brain plasticity involved in problem solving and creativity, energy conservation, and most importantly, biological regulations of all the different mechanisms of the body at the level of organ, tissue, and cells, and cell repair and tissue regeneration, so that therefore the implication of sleep disturbances in cancer development. How much sleep do we really need is difficult to answer. We know that from birth to adulthood, the amount of sleep varies with the different stages of development, from newborn babies who most of the time spent asleep to adults, where in general they sleep 7 to 9 hours per night or 6 to 8, depending on how you measure it. This is rather than being normal, we can refer it as usual in our modern societies, although in the past there were different patterns, sometimes also multiphasic patterns of sleep, which were adopted in centuries past. When we look at the epidemiology of duration of sleep, we see that the definition is related to the distribution of a bell-shaped curve, where the majority of people, this is UK-based survey, sleep between 8 and 9 hours per night. However, about a quarter of them are either side of this range, or either below 6 or above 9. And we will call it for simplicity in our talk either short sleepers and long sleepers. How do we define sleep quantity? It's very simply the amount of sleep we have per night. The average would be 6 to 8 hours per night, the usual one. Whereas the quality, which identifies how well we sleep, is more subtle than open to bias, and it tries to establish several domains of the quality, including fragmentation, difficulty in falling asleep or maintaining sleep, excessive daytime sleepiness, poor quality of life due to sleep problems, irritability, impaired cognitive function, tiredness, fatigue, all these measures. So, as far as duration is concerned, it can be measured by self-reported data, either by questionnaire or by filling sleep diaries, usually over 1 to 2 weeks. The next way of measuring more objectively duration of sleep is by actigraphy. The actigraphy, using wearable devices, record movement and detect active from idle states, and derive therefore wakefulness and sleep status. These devices can now be very accurate and can be worn for many weeks, depending on the duration of batteries. So we'll give a good idea of patterns of the sleep-wake cycle. And finally, the gold standard of multi-channel polysomnography is used mostly in specialist centers, although now we have also ambulatory devices can be applied at home and measure not only the sleep-wake cycle, the actigraphy, but mainly activity of the brain, establishing the hypnogram, so the stages of sleep, ECG, oculogram with the eye movement, EMG with contraction and paralysis, respiratory rates, oximetry, and other parameters. The quality can be measured by questionnaire, by and large. And then we have several. The Berlin questionnaire items including the SF-36, for instance, or the excessive daytime sleepiness by Apple score, and so on. Well, in the last 50 years, we have noticed a steep decline in the duration of sleep of populations. This is US American data, the longest recorded through the Sleep Foundation, which records more than 1.5 hour decline in 50 years of average duration of sleep of adult Americans. This steady decline can be attributed to a number of factors, including increased shift work over this period of time, longer working hours, less physically demanding job, but more sedentary lifestyle, extended use of devices and social media, in other words, the establishment of 24/7 society. And why do we sleep less is mainly because we tend to go to bed later rather than waking up early. This is a survey in different countries showing that the average, the decline in sleep duration is associated with later bedtime rather than early wake up time. And this is not surprising due to the fact that most adults in the working age do use alarm clocks and other cues to wake up irrespective of their biological clock. So short duration of sleep is, if sustained over a long period of time, is bad for our health. We have now a large epidemiological set of data to support the idea that the less you sleep on a regular basis, the more likely you are over a period of time to develop incident cases of risk factors like obesity, hypertension and hypercholesterolemia, type 2 diabetes, and also to experience fatal and non-fatal coronary heart disease, strokes, and die early. These prospective studies do not prove cause-effect relationship, and therefore we also rely on short-term clinical trials, particularly on the intermediate outcomes of risk factors, in controlled trials on normal volunteers to show that the effect is reversible and can be caused in controlled conditions. I've just selected this on blood pressure because of the topic of this meeting, and this is a randomized clinical trial of sleep extension in healthy volunteers, and from the control group of sleep maintenance, sleeping about 6.5 hours per night, the sleep were extended by different measures to aiming for an extra hour over 6 weeks, and the 24-hour MDPM was applied at the beginning and the end. At the end of the trial, the average increase in sleep duration was over 30 minutes on average. And you can see here that there was a direct fall in both systolic and diastolic blood pressure, both at day and night. And this effect was also reversible in the crossover fashion, indicating that duration of sleep affects blood pressure. And also in this study, prospective study, using polysomnography in a cohort of 3 cohorts of American individuals, and the amount of arousals were associated with a higher incidence of cardiovascular disease. Microarousals are common in many conditions, including sleep apnea syndrome, and those are undetected by the individual, but will lead, as you can see, to fragmentation of sleep and increasing risk. Similarly, when we look at quality of sleep, prospectively we found that the worse is the quality of sleep in terms of difficulty in initiating sleep, maintaining sleep, early morning, awakening, or non-restorative sleep, the greater the risk of developing heart failure. The effect is dose dependent with the amount of dimensions of insomnia detected, and the potential pathophysiological mechanisms linking would be obviously related to increasing sympathetic activity, increasing glucose intolerance, dyslipidemia, hypertension, and also to systemic inflammation and a dysregulation of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, all leading to cardiovascular risk and heart failure. How do we improve sleep quantity and quality? While sleep disturbances are linked to health outcomes with bidirectional effects. So we have indicated so far that sleep disturbances lead to health outcomes in prospective studies, but we need to be aware that a number of underlying conditions may lead to sleep disturbances. And I won't go into details here. One is clearly a sleep apnea syndrome or depression, so that the cure of the sleep disturbances will be dependent on the cure of the underlying condition. However, there are sleep disturbances related to lifestyle and measures, like in the 24/7 society, and the solution bidirectionally is to try and change the behavior and lifestyle, as I'll show in a minute. But more importantly, and that's bringing the sleep disorders into the domain of public health, is to try and create an enabling environment to reduce the time pressure on individuals to sacrifice their sleep. As far as the individual practical sleep tips for adults, and these sometimes are referred as um, hygiene measures. I don't like this word particularly, but basically it's a series of recommendations to keep regular hours with routines, to create a restful sleep environment in terms of dimming the light, reducing noise, controlling temperature, and avoiding bright screen high technology in the room. Make sure your bed is comfortable. Take more exercise, but not too close to the time when you go to bed, not to extend your sleeping time. Cut down on stimulants, similarly coffee and tea and energy drinks closer to the time you go to bed. Do not overindulge in food and alcohol that will delay the sleeping time. Do not smoke. And if you do smoke, don't smoke at the time you go to bed. Try to relax before going to bed by reading a book, listening to some music in a sort of unlit environment. Deal with worries or workload, sometimes is referred to as one of the causes of insomnia. Writing a list of things to do for tomorrow and putting it on your desk would probably take it away from your mind. If you cannot sleep and get up, do something relaxing and go back to bed later on. Now, I need to mention just one of the common causes, but we will hear later, of sleep disturbances, which is sleep apnea syndrome. Just to say that there is a graded relationship between the severity of sleep apnea syndrome and the incidence of hypertension and of all-cause mortality. And the mechanisms behind that are several-fold. Obviously, there is sleep fragmentation, there is poor oximetry, there is a rise in nocturnal blood pressure at night, activation of sympathetic drive, and all these increase inflammation, which in turn would be contributors to the high risk of cardiovascular disease in this group. So, one argument would be that to increase sleeping time in sleep-deprived people, you just give sleeping pill. But sleeping pill is not the answer. In a retrospective cohort study in the UK, in primary care, individual users of anxiolytic and hypnotic drugs, which includes benzodiazepine and Z-drug, had a 3.4 times greater risk of mortality over a 7-year period of follow-up compared to non-users, so they die earlier. And the same is confirmed in a recent study published in Taiwan, when sleeping pill users, even if they sleep 6 to 8 hours per night, have a 55% increased risk of dying earlier than non-users. It has been worked out that for the 30 years old male using sleeping pill, there were 12 to 13 years of life lost compared to non-users. So that's not a good idea to compensate for sleep deprivation by using sleeping pills. The relationship between sleep disruption and health outcomes comes also through the misalignment of the sleeping time with your biological clock, sometimes called circadian misalignment or um, disentrainment. Typically in the shift work, we have a condition where people sleep at the wrong time of the day, at night. And therefore, that will have an increased effect on the risk of all type of conditions, as listed here, because obviously with the circadian, as we've heard earlier on, you need to sleep 6 to 8 hours, but also the right time in concordance with your biological clock and your day-night cycle or sleep-wake cycle. Shift work, I mentioned, disrupt sleep, and it's one of the associated causes of chronic disease as well as accidents when driving and doing works. And these are concerns for a large group of occupational workers. We've studied doctors, for instance, on call, and organizational strategies can mitigate, if not remove, the detrimental effect that shift work has in the short term on attentional failures and medical errors, risk for the doctors when they drive back home to be involved in car accidents, and in the long term of suffering from cardiometabolic diseases by sleep deprivation. So these are the factors we tend to indicate. The number of consecutive night shifts to be limited, the maximum duration of night shifts should be limited, the sequence of shifts should be forward going, avoiding slab shifts. The maximum working hours should be reduced, as has been established in the European Working Time Directives, although there are many areas in which you can have moratorium, and also sufficient time for recovery between shifts. And finally, creating an enabling environment is also an important issue which pertains to public health. Light, noise, and air quality and ambient temperature are responsible for disturbed sleep, as well as the built-in environment, the neighborhood, and society. So in conclusion, the sleep health should be put in the context of a factor, a behavioral factor, which involves not only individuals, but also social and societal levels of intervention in order to reduce what is now established to be a direct link between poor quantity, short duration and poor quality of sleep with a number of health outcomes very common in our societies, so cardiometabolic, mental health, and cancer. So not only is sleep management a clinical problem, but a wider public health issue. And I thank you for your attention.